Okay, so we run into each other by accident, and he goes back to Bloomberg and says, as his first hire on a new team for a new initiative, he wants me. And why does he want me? It's not because I knew anything technically. In fact, I didn't. He wanted me because he thought if I can get submariners to tell me classified information, then I could get a bunch of developers to calm down and listen to what they were trying to do when it came to naming software and files and libraries and all that good stuff. And he convinced John Lagos, who convinced Sean Edwards, who convinced Vlad Kliachko, which is basically, now we've just mentioned, like the most important people at Bloomberg. And they came around and they said, okay, you're hired. And I thought, I had no idea this was going on. I thought they were going to have me write a little bit of documentation. What happened is Tom pulled out a book about linkers and loaders, and I walked home that day, called my dad on the phone and said, all right, they're going to have to fire me. I didn't understand a word anybody said all day long. And the next day I made the same phone call, and the same phone call, and the same phone call. But at a certain point, being the person who had to ask questions, being the person who didn't know what anybody was saying, I realized not only was I getting answers from people, but I was making people think of their work in a whole different way. I was asking questions like, why? Well, wait a minute, what is this for? What is this used for? And in the beginning, and sometimes even now, I was a little shy about that. I didn't want to be the only person in the room that didn't know. But I got into the habit of asking, like after a meeting, if I didn't understand something, or a presentation, what were they talking about? And sometimes people would say to me, you know, damned if I know. I remember seeing my third talk about reflections, and I walked out with John Pavin, and I said, John, what is reflections about? And he said, yeah, I was in the 3 talks before I finally looked it up. Oh, okay, code generation and testing, that I know about. Anyway, it's been 19 and a half years. And oddly, not only did I end up being a key player on an outreach team at Bloomberg, which was designed to do exactly what I was doing for Tom, but I started talking about those processes and the rules we changed and the policies we created and the consensus we built. And somebody at an internal presentation said, you know, you should really do that at CppCon, Brett Brown actually. And lo and behold, I ended up on the conference circuit. Then I ended up coaching for conferences. I ended up also curating a talk internally with Bloomberg once a month. We call it Show and Tell. And now I am a track chair. 2 years later, I'm a track chair for CppCon. Think of it as everything but syntax. It's really the life and times of engineers. We call it business and careers. I am also teaching with Andre Alexandrescu, a 2-day workshop, what's going to become a 2-day workshop for new presenters and anybody else who tries to sign up. If there's room, you're welcome. And I was asked to talk about technical storytelling. And I have never been more afraid in my life. Because it's one thing to tell you a process story. It's one thing to tell you about working with Lara Bailey on creating rules for our internal messaging systems. It's another thing to talk about this, because in a weird way, this is who I am. I was the kid who in science class, I had bad handwriting. People would take notes for me, and they would send me the list of all the pile of English papers to the front of the room. And I'd edit their English papers while they were like writing my notes out so I could like learn them later. It is really scary to tell you guys, to try to do a talk about something I coach about. I mean, what if you hate it? What if you don't agree? And in fact, before I gave this talk for the first time, which was at CppNC, and these are always different because I only do outlines for slides, I started to panic. And I reached out to some conference organizers. And this has expanded, so I've had long conversations with Chris Ryan, Phil Nash, and John Kalb. And I wanted to ask, what did they care about? What did they want to get across? And it really boiled down to one thing. what do you love about conferences? Why are you here? So I need to know who's in the audience. I need to know who I'm talking to. So I'm going to ask that question to you guys. There's a microphone that's running around, right? Who wants to tell me what they love about conferences? Okay, Michelle.
No.
Throwing things can be good, especially at me.
No, but I think the hallway track, in a way, like the learnings you learn from talking to people rather than the presentations. But
That is right on. Chris, what did you tell me about why this format is different than it's been in the past?
We are aiming not to be strictly C++ anymore, to also include people and the careers and the people track. Half the stuff we're doing here isn't technical.
And the other thing is you guys put in less talks, right? To make more room in between the talks, more time for people to talk about, absorb, and think about what they were hearing. Is right? Instead of 3 at a time, and you guys made it narrower and you had more time in between. And that's really it. This is how Phil put it. It is something that most speakers have tuned into. It's not really the talks that are the important thing. It's what goes on in between the talks. The talks are important because they feed into that. They help create what you bring into the breaks and into the bar afterward. What you bring to the connections you make between and the friends you make, that you are all thinking along similar lines. So how do you punch through from the hallway track into the lecture rooms? That's really the gist of it. When I am coaching people, I have learned to say, don't give me a dry run right away. First, tell me what you're doing. For the talks I curate monthly at Bloomberg, there's a rule. You have to talk to me twice. First, in the very beginning, before you started to craft your talk, and second, as a dry run, to sort of smooth out the edges. Because the beginning part, I ask a lot of the questions about why. Michelle, there was a situation where you came to me with a really interesting bit of tech that you had found. I need a microphone for Michelle. And was it new? Why were you talking about it?
so I think what you're referring to is the return value thing where I throw things at people. But yeah, it was not a new piece of technology. It was something pretty old. It had been around since before I was born. And yes. But I think the nice thing about it was I liked digging deeper and understanding why and showing people why it was important. And
by the time you and I were done answering the question why, we also found out that Sustrup had actually put it in his design book because it was something he thought was really important and a beautiful piece of tech. And in the end, you were giving a talk not about the thing you don't know or the thing you're using wrong, but about the beauty of the language itself. Cal, that's Cal. You told me after you gave your talk, he had created a tool that didn't exist before. And I wanted to know, I'm just reminding you now, I wanted very much to know why that tool, how did you find it? How did you end up doing it? And he told a story about being new to Bloomberg, being new to C++, starting to read all the documentation for things that he could, finding the hole in the process. What happened after? Who came up to you after? Did they want to have questions about the tool, or did they have questions about something else?
I think what you're talking about wasn't necessarily C++, but I think it was a new website for our backend for build systems.
And you said that the younger developers wanted to know one thing in particular.
Oh yeah, they wanted to know, how do we get to work on projects like that? And my answer was, you start.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm going to say, it's hard to gain that confidence, especially when you're new, and you've got to be prepared to fail sometimes.
And that became part of the talk you gave. It wasn't just that this back-end website was important. It was, how do you come in as a brand new person and, as Kate said, change the world? And part of what he offered people was a way to change the world. They may never look at that website, but they were going to remember that talk, and they did. So when I was talking about this another time, John Lakos struck up that Andre had shared with him what he called the 3 E's. I was a little pissed because we had done an entire all-day workshop and I had not heard of these before. But they were engage, entertain, and educate. You are not just saying everything you know about a topic. You're not just doing a deep dive into syntax. You're having people think about, well, wait a minute, maybe I could approach this problem the same way. You're telling detective stories. You're telling crisis management. You're talking about breakdowns. And these could be completely fascinating. Don't forget why you're talking. From your proposal through the last audience question, this needs to be a conversation. It needs to be human. It needs to be personal. Or John Kalb said, be vulnerable. I was talking to Chris about this, and Chris said, oh yeah, you have to tell them the times you went down the wrong track. You have to tell them about the mistakes you made. Otherwise, how is anybody going to appreciate the success? It's part of it. If all you had to do is wake up in the morning and sit down at your desk and it was done, why are you on stage? This is something that happens also when people's examples are too far from what they're doing. I got a lot of criticism about my first version of the talk, like 2 pages from a woman named Grace that I've been coaching. And she came to me because she had been taking UX design classes, not just in engineering school, but across the street in the design school. And really learning tools that we're all trying to emulate in engineering, but understanding that it's more than just creating the iPhone, that you could literally, in her case, figure out cluster design by learning to quantify the value of a grimace or a shudder when somebody's talking about existing tools. And she was going to talk about it by showing, she was going to create an airline reservation app. And I asked her, you do a lot of those apps? And she said, never. And I said, okay, what is this for? She said, it's so boring. But that's the guts of that story. The boring work that could be made wonderful and easy and not the thing that everybody dreads is what this person who 1 year out of school had brought to Bloomberg. And in fact, we're going to have her on my track at CppCon as like one of my beginning speakers, because these tools, because that creativity becomes so important. And I pushed her away from getting too far from her experience, going and digging into it. Because if you remember what it was that made you care in the first place, if you remembered what it was that made you want to talk in the first place, you were going to bring so much more into what you do and what you say. You're not going to have cold examples. You're now going to have people along with you for the ride. Andre said it best. We are a species of storytellers. I believe that you guys learn how to tell stories. We all do before we have language. Because the first things you're going to say as a little kid is, Mom, and you're going to tell them what happened. This is something that we do really naturally. You should be talking to the audience like you're talking to your best friends. You should be thinking about why you care. If you dry it out too much, if you step back too much, you're going to lose half of what makes it interesting. So the most interesting stories, show journey, obstacles you had to overcome. We did that, right? And let me take a minute. Does anybody disagree with this? I know that, Chris, I'll get to your point later, but I actually think you do storytell, so that's why I'm saving it.
Disagree with storytelling or with what's on this slide?
Disagree with what is on the slide? No, disagree with the concept that you can help create technical understanding by making it human.
Absolutely. The only way you're going to connect to another person.
You do it brilliantly. I mean, when I was first talking, everybody said you have to watch Kate Gregory. I watched more of your YouTube in the beginning, and it's like, okay, I felt so much better about the way I spoke to people because I kind of felt like, you got it. And it was part of what we experienced here. You had me not just thinking about what you were saying, but experiences that were parallel and moments that I felt I had changed the world. Try writing a book where people had never told their families or best friends or their kids where they'd been, what they had done, and all of a sudden getting people to talk to each other.
Wow.
It's crazy what you can do just by showing up and working hard and doing something that you care about. And I just was so inspired. And that's the thing. It should be, when you read a book, it feels good because you're creating half of the story along with a good writer. A bad writer tells you everything and you're bored silly, but a good writer leaves room for you to create half the scene. When you're talking, if you're doing well, if people are going to lean forward, they should be thinking of times that they were in a similar situation. They should be thinking of, oh my God, that might be a way I could solve this problem. They shouldn't just be looking at the code on the screen. And, you know, unless you have done something that is so obvious and revolutionary, and even then, it should be simple enough to make them be impressed by your process, not just what you've come up with. Make them think, maybe I can do that someday. So I wanted to take you through a little bit of the process for doing a talk. But let me see, has anybody in this room not been a speaker? Okay, a couple of you. And has anybody in this room not ever taken part in the selection process for a conference? All right. So even some of you who are speakers can get some understanding as to how this works. Guys, Chris, do you guys use Speakerfish or something else?
Yeah, we use Speakerfish this time around.
All right. So I hadn't done CppNorth, but I have now done ACCU, CppOnC, and CppCon. And there's a software called Speakerfish where the proposals are put in and people start, let me step even further back before I get to Speakerfish. People are going to read your proposal and they're going to choose, right? You are rendered invisible if they do it right. They will take off your name. They will take off your company name. Best be loud. And what do I mean about that? You need to be obvious. You need to say, this is what my story is about. When people come out of my talk, they're going to know something they didn't know before. They're going to be able to do something they didn't know before. This is what they're going to get out of it. And in round one, the way Speakerfish works is it shows 3 proposals. And by the way, you guys could probably volunteer to do this for CppNorth next year. It shows 3 proposals randomly, and you pick. I like this one first, this one second, this one third. You might even say, I know nothing about this one. Don't show it to me again. Click the next one, and you will go through this dozens and dozens of times. First, second, third, first, second, third. And in the end, those will create statistics and scores. And pretty much in this process, Oh, I don't want round one. Hang on. I am going backwards. I don't want round one yet. Okay. In this process, new tech wins. It also helps when you have an outline for your proposal, it looks like something you could accomplish in the time you've got. And it helps that you're not selling something. If you got a company, step back a little bit and get away from exactly what you're selling, because that will be death. Yes.
Can I rant about this new process? This is what made me stop submitting to CppCon, because my talk get completely thrown out and I don't know why. I have 0 piece of feedback outside of you failed the face mash part of the algorithm, left, right. Congratulations, try again. I'm done.
Okay, well, the first thing is I would tell you is send it to me and I will tell you a little bit more about what questions I would have had. I manned the help desk, I would say single-handedly at CppCon this year, but really, every time it was about something I didn't know, I farmed it off to friends. Okay, tell me what this is going on. Tell me if this is valid. I could tell you the story part of it, but I couldn't necessarily tell you the ins and outs of ranges. So If you send it to me, I can get you not necessarily answers as to who voted for what, but what I perceive as having been through the process, what happened. But in the first one, there is a bias toward things that people think are very heavy, very dense, very syntax oriented. As much as sometimes speakers will get up here and try to show you everything that they know, and then they'll talk faster because they only have an hour to show you everything that they know, and they'll leave no room for questions, and they're trying to get so much on the screen that, well, two speakers coming back from Bristol to Heathrow on a bus with me said it's great because sometimes you just have to go back and watch it 4 times before you know what anybody said. And I thought, yeah, you and 2 other people in the room. There is a bias toward, can we be denser than the next guy? Everybody wants to show what they know. But there's a second round, and this might help you. Look at what the tracks are. In round 2, the program committee takes over. As a track chair, I put my track name on some things that came in as general or under tooling. I got to look at everything that was there, and sometimes my stuff got the lowest scores because people are looking for a certain kind of technical intricacy, and I was looking for professional intricacies. I didn't want the general, I'm going to tell you everything I know and say everything that's obvious, but people who could show me that there was experience and detail and thought into something that would have gotten into CppNorth, but would not have gotten into CppCon, I was interested in. If you have something that matches a track, and you could say why, and you could say why it's important, and what you're going to teach people, there are the track chairs, and usually 2 per track, reading for that. And that's where you have a chance to show off story, depth, and by the way, a little journalism doesn't hurt. Remember what I said. I had been coaching for years. For the book, I was on the road for 2 years. I had the world's longest book tour because it kept selling. We passed 1 million copies like 5 years ago. I still wanted to talk to people who ran conferences to make sure that what I thought was important jived with them. I wouldn't have changed my mind, but I at least would have left room for disagreement. So show it to me, but also, next time you guys are applying, look to see what the tracks are. Look to see what might be a little bit different, what might be a different point of view, and then be really specific about it. So let's assume, sorry that the facial recognition thing happened to you. I bet working together we could help it not next time. But let's assume you get it. Congratulations. We had a lot of submissions. And congratulations, yours was one of them. Now you have to take that proposal and that outline and make it into a talk. So step away from the slide deck. Does anybody here try to write by making slides? Yeah. I will say that you really can't do that. And this is why. You can, but you won't do your best. When I teach even general writing classes, and I do, one of my volunteer gigs at Bloomberg is I go up to the Frost Valley YMCA, which is in the Catskill Mountains, and for anywhere from 3 to 5 days at a time, I will teach writing and presentation classes. And the first thing I realize is people try to do too much at once. You can't possibly focus on what you're trying to say when you're focusing on formatting and spelling and wording. It's too much. He needs a mic.
So I have to disagree with that because there are different kinds of mindsets. There are logical minds and there are more philosophical minds. And right now I have to say we have AI as well. So basically you don't need to be that confident about what you're writing. Spelling it correctly, it will fix it for you. So in my case, I cannot write a story and just write it. I have it inside my head and I'm just spitting it out onto the PowerPoint, and that's it.
I'm just saying, look, first I say try not to do it top to bottom. That's another thing. Don't start at the beginning and go to an end. Here's the deal. I wrote a book, right? I wrote a book that sold more than 1 million copies. You could find a documentary on the YouTube called Blind Man's Bluff and see me like when I was still had dark hair and 40 pounds lighter before kids. And people would say, what is your book about? And I would say, oh, submarine stories, spy stories. What it's about. It's all classified information. What is it about? It's pearls on a string. We're going to go chronologically. It wasn't until we had written all the pieces that we realized we had just written a book about preventing a repeat of Pearl Harbor in a nuclear age. I think you should take the moments, the pieces, the bit of tech that mattered most to you, deal with them completely separately. Take a deep breath and say, what do I have? What fits? What really can go? And then think about, now step back when you've done these things and say, okay, what is this really about? You're going to get a different point of view. You're going to have a different perspective because all these things are now down and you're not racing from one piece to the next. You're putting your whole heart, even if you do it 10 minutes at a time, guys, and don't edit yourselves. Chris would hand me back, my co-author would hand me back a chapter with a few questions, and I'd put a day and a half into it and send him back the newly cleaned up chapter, and he would yell at me. We all edit the hell out of ourselves. We sanitize. We pull so far back, we lose the whole heart of it. Usually, unless you think you've been duplicative or wrong, the first way you tell a story is going to be the best. The way you told it when it really, really mattered, when you were frustrated or tired or kicking yourself or figuring out what the questions were in your team. If you could capture those notes as you're working on a project, you guys would all have the best pieces. Again, this is nothing you can't do. We just convince ourselves we shouldn't. So one moment, one thought at a time. I wanted to say something about AI also. I was being encouraged to play around with AI. My team wanted us to all know what it was about. And I have figured out why AI sucks at this. AI is good at taking what is there and interpreting it when it's not hallucinating. It doesn't create. It doesn't ask you the questions that somebody who is like pushing you to remember, to pull it out of your nose. It doesn't ask you the questions so that you can tell it what it doesn't already know. And it has no memory. After like 2 or 3 questions, it reverts back to what it knew in the LLM. It does not remember that you've had this whole conversation and it can't pull the pieces together. I think AI might be fine for like drawing slides for you, but it's stupid. It is at this moment stupid. What? I know, right? Unless we convince everybody that that's creativity. So I like literally push back against the machine, guys. All right. So you're going to talk about what problems you were trying to solve, what things are used for, what were your victories, and what were your mistakes. Now, here's Chris. Chris, when I was telling him about all this in a conversation we were having just the other day, said, but I don't storytell. I'm a core dump. I'm an orthogonal geek. I want to share everything about everything, so I'll go through it with a logical progression of pieces that build on pieces. And I like to see the internals, the mechanisms. And that is storytelling, guys. This is why this mattered. This is where I went first. This is how I got it wrong. He is a storyteller and doesn't even know it. It doesn't have to be that the sky was blue and and the sea was green. It has to, and it could be deep, and it could be technical. I'm just saying, give people a way to follow along with you, and don't give them more than they need, and tell them why it matters. If you're going to talk about value semantic types and a shared language for them, which we're creating at Bloomberg, say we are data. We are the holders of decades of data. And wouldn't it be great if people can dive into it and ask questions that hadn't been perceived before? Why does it matter? What is it going to be used for? How am I changing the world? One program, one thought at a time. And the more you do that, even when you're actually working on the projects that you're working on, the more those projects are going to reflect what is so important, what they're gonna dream. You're gonna dream of things you didn't even think of before, because you're gonna start asking yourselves the questions why. So, Andre called it the rule of three. What can people follow, absorb, and remember? The rule of three in this talk: who am I, and why am I the one you should listen to? What's my history here? How do you go through the process of getting a proposal in, writing a talk? So now, I believe now that you've got those pieces together, you figured out what they add up to, now you could work on your slides. Now you could pull out PowerPoint. It is easier to do it with a pad and pen or in like a Google Doc than it is to do it in a bunch of slides. And you won't get married to being just putting in too much. And use them as illustrations for what you already want to say. I have a problem with slides. I'm bad at them. I'm really bad at them. And I sit there telling you guys, when you do slides for code, try not to just do a super simple example. Try to take the piece of code you, as close as you can within whatever your workplace restrictions are, that you were actually working on, so you could remember why it was interesting to you in the first place. But I do that really badly. So you'll see, I borrowed the slides that I'm going to use for this talk. I'm just getting ahead of myself. So you're on stage. Tell people who you are in the context of why you're giving the talk. And ask your audience who they are. And this is important. I gave one talk about namespaces, and it was a great success. And I came internally to Bloomberg thinking I'm going to have that same success. And I was putting people to sleep. Because before, I was dealing with people who were clients of infrastructure people who were going to give them roles. And this time I was talking to other infrastructure people, and I hadn't figured that out until it was too late. Find out who's in the audience. You're going to change your talk, not necessarily rip it apart and start from scratch on stage, but subtle differences matter. It matters to me that you were a room full of speakers. If you were a room full of people who only wanted to think about speaking, I would spend a lot more time talking about the selection process than I did. Think about who's in the audience and what they care about. And the way to know that is to ask them. Now, Steve, you were doing a talk about ranges, and you were going to premiere this at CPP Now. Do you remember what advice I gave you? Could somebody give him a microphone? Sorry, I'm leaning on the fact that there are friends in the audience, but really, if you have examples or stories you want to share, offer them to me. I don't mean to exclude anybody else. It's just easier for me to know who I'm talking to.
Kind of the main thing you told me is to talk about why I'm giving this talk, why it came about, what's sort of like the reason for it, like to tell the story.
Especially since you were probably going to be talking to the people who worked on ranges for the standards committee. And for you, how did you come to ranges?
I actually discovered it at this conference last year, and I became really interested in it and kind of just started diving into it.
And so the question came up with Steve, is what can the amateur teach the expert? Do you remember what I told you?
Just my own experience that they wouldn't have had on the ground.
How it was received. If you're going to work really, really hard on a piece of the standard, you have to let it out into the ether sometime. Even the guys who wrote the standard are going to lean forward to find out how people are using it, how they're interpreting it. You don't have to be the guy who came up with it. You could be the person who was curious, who loved it. But lean into that. Lean into what your role was, because that's part of the story, but it's also part of why people will hear you. You don't have to be 100% right. If somebody says, but there's another way to do it, that's great. You have started a conversation. You got people engaged enough to go, but wait a minute, I've got something to say. I disagree with you. So slides and demos. Less is more. I was panicking about this one. First, I was under the impression that people should never, ever, ever program on stage. As far as I was concerned, it was like watching paint dry. And I mentioned that to Phil Nash, who said, no, I've seen it work really well. Like Compiler Explorer, you show one thing and there on another screen, something else is happening. But then he gave a qualification. And this is what I want you guys to remember. If you're going to program on stage, you need to do it like you have choreographed a dance. You need to work out all the steps really well. And then you have to practice and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. because unless it's perfect, it is like watching paint dry, which is why my advice was always never try it. So I'm going to change that advice. You can try it if you're willing to put the work in. Phil wanted to point out that white backgrounds matter. Turned out in this conference, they couldn't completely black out the room. White backgrounds matter, and font matters. Make it easy to read. You don't want people squinting at your slide and not listening. And you, John.
So one of the things that can really help people choreograph their code examples is asking people to have a recording as a backup in case something goes wrong during live. But people will make that recording perfect, and that takes a great deal of rehearsal and practice.
That's a good way to do it. It's or even use the recording, because maybe then you know it actually is going to work. There was a young man in our shop who wanted to show how something was much faster, but because he didn't want people watching a clock, he sped them both up. So they ended at exactly the same time. And I suggested he shoot them both off and start talking and just interrupt himself. Oh, that one's done. And then a few slides later, okay, now it's that one. If it doesn't show something, don't do it. And again, maybe pre-record it or at least use that as a way to practice. That's a really great idea. Okay, so I don't like slides that come from nowhere, and code slides people do. But John Kell sent me his slide deck where he was teaching people how to do things. So it was a talk about slides. And he I just did a couple of examples. You could do call outs. This is where he taught me how to use animations. And those bubbles help, those thought bubbles, or do really good underlining. The first time I tried to use that slide, the underlining didn't match up because we had different slide programs. It was really a disaster. But, John was available when it was midnight in Folkestone in the UK. He was on the West Coast in the US. And I was struggling with this. And after months of working on the talk, I still had to get these things in the night before. And he just sent these to me. So even with mis-highlighting, it was actually pretty helpful. But we've corrected it since then, this morning. Anyway, and then at the end, you want to go over with people what mattered most. You want to tell people, have empathy for your audience. Talk to them, not at them. Don't overload them. Think about why you're here and what was important. Where have you been? And then start the next conversation, which is what I want to do right now. How much time do I have? Good. Because what I want to do is talk to you guys about what are you working on? What questions do you have? Is there a talk that you'd like to give? Is there something you would like to know? We have 2 microphones. You can take mine if you want to. Let's have a conversation. Is anybody working on a talk idea right now? You are, okay.
So the talk idea is for the lightning talks tomorrow. I've pitched an idea. It seemed like a good one to me. And actually, don't start on the slides first. I was born before we used PowerPoint, so I come by it naturally as far as just doing prose first or just thinking about what am I really trying to say, what actually matters. So that part resonates. I guess the big question that I would have for you is so when I'm writing a paper, like a research paper, I'll write the entire thing first and then write the abstract after I know everything that's there. If you're trying to do a proposal for a talk, you are in the unfortunate situation where you have to kind of write the abstract up front, or at least the synopsis of what the proposal is. So what are ways you would suggest one deal with that problem?
There are a couple of ways to answer this. First, even with a proposal abstract, don't start from the beginning. Think about the part of it that you really cared about most that got you engaged, and write that little piece of it first. This really comes from something. When I got chosen, when my co-author, who I also bumped into by accident, life happens when you show up, guys, asked me to co-author Blind Man's Bluff with him. He had already been doing a series of articles for the Chicago Tribune. I had never written anything longer than a column in the New York Times, which is about 1,000 words. And I knew nothing about the military. Women weren't allowed to ride on submarines, at least not as a career, that you could take a jaunt out. And I was like a deer in the headlights. Even worse, my process was always to keep asking questions until the story came together and there was nothing, I couldn't think of anything else to ask of as many people. But we only had like a $10,000, no, it was an $80,000 advance, but we had to get 40 years of information and go all around the country. So we broke things up geographically. So I never knew why I was going to talk to somebody next, and the pieces weren't coming together at all. And we ended up at the end of this with notes that I could not make heads or tails of. And I would stare at the computer and go, where do I start? And Chris started calling me and going, okay, just write the part where they got stuck under a Soviet boat. Write the part where the commander freaked out and the chief of the boat had to take over. Write the character sketch of the madman pirate who turned out to be a genius. And I would write these pieces at a time. Write small bits of it at a time. The next thing is your proposal will change. Your piece will change. Do not feel like you've now written your outline. Get as close as you can. But honestly, I was at my 30th, 40th maybe. How old am I? I'm 65, so probably my 40th journalism school reunion. And people who had written books were standing up front. They were saying, oh, the proposal, it took me 5 years. And then I had to find the story I was born to write. And oh my God, my writer's voice, I had to craft that. And I got up because I was just like, we're telling everybody in the audience, you're too stupid to do this, but we're special. And they were like, yes, do you have a question? And I said, well, just a comment. I co-authored Blind Man's Bluff with Chris Drew, who had actually helped teach that class. And you know what? If your book looked like your proposal, good on you, but ours didn't look anything like it. We had no idea. And by the way, the writer's voice, just talk to your best friend. And the story idea of a lifetime, find a good yarn, find a good topic, and just go for it. And if you like it enough to write an article, maybe you'll like it enough to write a book. Don't worry about make a proposal that is as close as you can be, but keep the human side in and remember to say, I think this is what I'm showing, or this is what I'm showing, and then prepare for it to change. If you're not completely off, nobody's going to go back. In fact, Chris Ryan sent out a last-minute blast. Everybody, read your initial descriptions of your talks and see if you need to change anything. Well, for our panel, we had to change everything. You can change it. You can go back in and say, okay, for the program, let me tell you what I really ended up talking about. So I want to ask you, what is it that what's your lightning talk going to be about?
The idea is to talk about the choice that programmers often have, technical people in general have, at some point in their career is they are either told or asked if they want to be a leader of a team or a manager, and weighing the pros and cons of that. What do you gain from that? What do you give up from that?
You should come see our panel tomorrow.
Well, I plan to.
And now get more specific. Was there a moment when you had to make that decision? Why do you want to talk about that?
Two reasons. One is, yes, I sort of inadvertently made that decision early on in my career to go into management, actually, and wasn't sure that was the right decision for me at that moment in time. The other reason is I've seen people say, no, I couldn't be the team lead because whatever, where I thought, oh, you're making a terrible mistake, you'd be awesome at it. So that's what I want to convey, that last piece in particular.
I would challenge you to pin it down to your story and maybe the story of the other person's. I think that if you don't have to only tell their story, but if you start with something real, you won't end up making the mistake that people do when they're not pinning a talk into code by being too general. There were these kids who wanted to talk about grassroots change for technical change at Bloomberg. And they came to me for a run through. It was before our guild week. We have these craft skills, but we do it for expertise in languages. There's a C++ guild, a Python guild, and they were like, sweat the small stuff, take notes, talk to people. They said, wait a minute, what is your story? And it turned out they had created small miracles by just trying to get buy-in from people who you wouldn't expect, including people who could rip old things that were deprecated off of half the machines so that half the people who hadn't moved forward would like hit a roadblock and have to change, and the next week would change again. They would reach out to people and say, what is stopping you from deprecating this? Because people want to do the right thing. Sometimes it's just really not made clear how to do it. So try to pin it to the story. Try to pin it to the specifics. And if you ended up going back and forth a little bit, tell that part too. If you tell your story with an understanding of the points that you want to make that matter to it, you will emphasize the right points. And it's a great conversation, right? How do you decide to give up titles for a career that is where you were known for what you touch? Or do you want to have the surety of knowing that there's a career track? That's kind of what our panel is about. Come to our panel. You teach a lot of young people, and they come to Bloomberg, and I'm sure that, do they know enough to question what they know? Michelle is out, 2 years now? 3 years? Yeah, but she has been on the conference circuit because she's been doing a deep dive into stuff that makes her curious. What's the most important thing you tell people in terms of trying to learn what's actually happening?
I think one of the most important things is forget what you know or you think you know. I think because they're fresh out of college, they're in their, first job usually. They want to make a splash and they want to do the things that you've already told us we shouldn't do, like say everything we know about everything. And so I will be standing in front of them and they'll go, I have a question. I'm like, cool. I hope I have an answer. I do. I always have an answer. It just might not be the one they're looking for, and then they spend 20 minutes telling me everything they know about something. I'm like, are we getting to a question somewhere? And so I try to encourage them to just forget everything they know and be curious about the thing they don't know anything about. Be the novice, right? A lot of what we teach them is internal, and they're not going to know it until, and if they're closed to all of that, then I can't help them. And that's going to affect their career as they move forward.
And those nuances, those questions that they'll come up with, that empathy that they'll have for somebody who's maybe not getting off the deprecated tech, right? Like the assumption that people are going to do the right thing when they can, finding out why they're not, that makes you do your job better. And that's the same empathy that you could bring to a talk. That's the same nuance that makes what you have to say interesting. So I think that a lot of this is how to be successful in general. Remember where I started? As an outsider, I had an edge. And the edge was I wasn't worried if people didn't think I didn't know. I wasn't worried about appearing stupid. In fact, in my entire career, only one person ever looked at me and said, I'm surprised you don't know that. And they were a bit of an asshole. If you think about why am I saying this and why am I here, and you don't step so far back that you say, there's a decision you need to make in your career. Will you go this way and will you go that way? And in this way you have these rules and that way you have those rules. But if you tell your story and you highlight the parts of it that you want people to remember, they're going to remember it more because it was in the context of what happened to you. What about somebody else? Is anybody else working on a lightning talk right now? Anybody else working on anything right now? So, what, you were pointing at somebody?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah,
I have
can.
a question. When it comes to slides and everything, because you mentioned that earlier, like images is like a big part, and I feel like a lot of people tend to like see words. You said use less words, but like images, do you think to use more image or like less image? Like, how would that work?
Here's the thing, and I think about it's very parallel to kind of what I'm saying in other things. There are people who love to make cute slides. There are people who love to have great pictures. If the pictures are showing you something that matters, that's great. If it's a running cartoon behind you and it isn't really sticking to a point and doesn't have a reason to be there, I think it's distracting. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, guys, yeah, here.
Images are open to interpretation. If the image is 100% clear and you're going to take people through that image and what you want them to get out of it, use it. If it's just supposed to be there and you're going to gesture to it vaguely and go see, you're opening yourself up to the idea that somebody will interpret it differently in a way that you either doesn't follow the flow of your talk or that goes completely the wrong direction.
That, and these days with AI keeps offering to generate images for you. I mean, you can become almost a caricature of yourself if you're not careful. So use them if they actually are clear and are making a point. Otherwise, why? Let people look at you. Let people hear what you're saying. You don't have to keep them entertained with the screen. Does anybody disagree with that? Does it, Yeah.
It sounds like from everything you said, that idea that if there's a gun in the scene, then it must go off in movies. It sounds like that. If you're showing something in a slide, then it has to have a message, like the comment that you were making about the images. If it has a point, then show it. If it doesn't, then kind of skip it, even filler words or pretty images, charts, whatever that might be.
And I'll challenge you to do one more thing. If your impulse was to put it in, think about what was behind the impulse. There's maybe a point that you just haven't made yet. Does this have to be here? And also, sometimes there'll be so much information that you think is interesting, but you can't cram it all in. You can't say everything. Our book starts out with a character sketch of one of the greatest submarine captains that ever lived. But everything went really well with his mission. And he wasn't first. So there was no beginning. There was no ending. There was no tragedy. And we had already talked, this was about underwater cable tapping, a way of eavesdropping on the Soviet Union. We realized that we couldn't fit yet another cable tapping story in the book without being boring. And I was going to have to take this beautiful character sketch and leave it on the cutting room floor until we realized that we also didn't have a really good way to start the book. So his character sketch is literally how we start. So think about why you cared. And by the way, if you have a lot more to say, think about another talk, think about a white paper. People could read and look things up differently than they can in a room where you're yakking at them, where they're going to be leaving and going into another room where people are yakking at them. Think about the overload that happens. And think about, this is a lovely room, but there are times when it's dark and there's no air. If you see people doing that, this is one of my favorite stories. I'm glad I've remembered to think about it. One of our trainers tells a story about how he was getting ready to teach a new topic. And our trainers have to learn things like they've known them forever very quickly. And somebody was out sick and he was being thrown in before he was ready. And he watched people, just the entire room nodding off, that the jerk awake thing going on. And he said, I have had people lose it, but I've never had an entire room lose it. How do you teach this in a way that's interesting? And he found out he had grabbed the reference slides and he was trying to teach that. But some talks are so dense that at that moment he didn't know the difference. That's what you don't want to do. And I loved him I asked him right away, can I share these things? Mostly I share stories where it just takes a small nudge to go from something that's not working to what will work. Just somebody who loves you enough to ask you the hard questions. Somebody who loves you enough to sort of say, why are you telling me this? There's a story John Kalb let me share. He wanted to talk about the STL, and he wanted to talk about Alex Stepanov, who created it, and his amazing background, how he was stripped of all of his credentials by the Soviet Union. When he came here, he wouldn't pick them back up. He couldn't go into academia because he thought that he lost them. But he had also written this template library, the standard template library. And he tells this amazing story, and then starts going into, as we're doing his dry run, things that he thinks are wrong with it. And as he goes on, I say, oh, wait, stop. You've just built this guy up. Why are you tearing him down? And John said, no, these are the things Alex would have wanted to change. These are the things Alex would want you to know to use the library properly. And I said, then say that. Put it in brackets. Maybe it's not too much, but say what that section is for. And he made that one change, gave the talk, and when he came off the stage, I got the biggest hug because he knew he nailed it. Sometimes you just have to tell people why you're going into something and why it matters. Bear with me. I'm going to go through these things because sometimes those tweaks make all the difference. So chart where you've been, start the next question. I don't think this is working anymore, but I'm not even going to worry about it. I think all I say after this is thank you very much. This is something I love doing. I am always available to anybody who wants me to coach. I never charge for this. I've helped kids get into college this way. I love helping people find what they really want to say. And the cool thing about my working with you guys, and maybe I could teach you to work with others because that would be even better, learn one, do one, teach one, is that I never can tell you better than you know about the tech. I am still a journalist in a software shop. But sometimes by asking the right questions, by giving you a hard time, I can get you to realize it yourself. And that's power. And that's a way to change the world, as an homage to Kate. Does anybody have any last questions before I give up the mic? Well, then I'm delighted that you came. And thank you so much.